What fact sounds like BS but it's actually true? Nintendo was founded in 1889, and they started out making trading cards. The jet engine was actually invented before the ballpoint pen. The ball in ballpoint pens requires some crazy precise engineering. They are little tungsten balls made so perfectly smooth that they can roll without leaking, or catching. Pretty insane for something you can get in a 20-pack for a few bucks and usually lose before using for very long. Took some magical engineering to get the falling off the table and activating invisibility mode working right. A chicken lived without a head for 18 months. How is that even possible? Without being able to eat, or drink, it would waste away. Was it being kept alive in a laboratory? Till this is true. Nope, by some farmers. When they removed the head they missed the jugular vein, leaving one ear and most the brainstem intact, and a clot prevented the chicken bleeding to death. They fed him with a mixture of milk and water via an eyedropper and small grains of corn and worms. The chicken actually died by accident from choking on a kernel of corn. You can live for years with heart failure. So far the most terrifying one I've read. T-Rex lived closer in time to us than it did to Stegosaurus. This always blows my mind. I learned the other day that sharks had existed longer than grass. Fucking grass, man. Despite widespread condemnation of the practice, performing pelvic exams on unconscious women for medical training, without explicit consent, is legal in 45 states. And this isn't one of those legal because no one bothered to change the law sort of legal. It's common practice. The Australians waged a war against birds. They lost decisively. The Chinese also. They won every battle, but lost the war. 45 million casualties. Sharks are older than trees. Prove it. Cut open a shark and let's count the lines on the shark. Rosa Parks lived long enough that it's entirely possible that she watched the first Shrek movie. Do people think the civil rights movement was ancient history? The great Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe died in 1601 from being too polite. He tried to hold in his pee for a long dinner one night and his bladder burst. He died from pee poisoning a few days later. He also had a dwarf who was psychic and he would do dances for Tycho. Tycho also had a deer that jumped down a flight of stairs after the deer was drunk at a party and died. He also owned at one point literally owned 1% of the wealth of Denmark. The Vatican contains 5.9 popes per square mile. Can you convert this to archbishops per square meter? I'm having trouble. It seems there are about 645 archbishops in the world, and if my liberal arts major math skills are correct, that's, one pope equals 645 archbishops, and 19 miles squared equals 492,098 square meters, then popes/me squared equals 645 492,098ths of a square meter, so there are 0.00131007 archbishops per square meter in Vatican City. Cleopatra's life was closer in time to the space shuttle than to the building of the pyramids. When the pyramids were built, mammoths were not yet extinct. Wow, I thought they died around 10,000 years ago, but a quick search said a small population survived up until 3,700 years ago on a large island off the coast of Russia. Pelicans can push their spines out of their mouth. Edit, can't. That is the most metal thing I have heard about in nature. The rings of Saturn are only 30 feet thick. It varies from about 10 meters to 1 kilometer. If you have no debt and $20 in your hand, you are statistically richer than most Americans. And if you have no debt and $21 in your hand, you're statistically richer than everyone fitting the previous statistic. The closest point to space on Earth isn't the summit of Everest. It's actually some stupid volcano in Ecuador. It's to do with a massive bulge in the Earth. Greater than it's to do with a massive bulge in the Earth. The largest volcano, and possibly mountain in general, in the solar system is Olympus Mons, on Mars. The cliffs at its base are already higher than Mount Everest, and once you're on the slope, you can pretty much hike up into space. Whether it's the tallest mountain in the solar system is disputed. The competitor is Rhea Silvia, on the asteroid Vesta. Black holes take so long to die that not a single one has died since the beginning of the universe. How does a black hole die? It keeps getting more mass and mass. Does it explode? How big would such an explosion be? Would we feel a black hole's explosion from a galaxy far, far away? Evaporate through Hawking radiation. How anesthetics actually work is unknown. They just do. That used to be true, until earlier this year. An Okinawan research team presented strong evidence for the exact function of one specific anesthetic, opening up the field quite a bit more. But overall, still no definitive answers. https://www.neurosci.org/content/40/21/4103 https://www.neurosci.org/content/40/21/4103. Can you summarize his plain English so I don't have to get a degree in medicine? Chemistry? To try to understand this. The Australian Aboriginals have stories dating back to when humans lived alongside megafauna. There's oral traditions about Phillip Island and French Island being connected to the mainland, which prompted geologists to investigate. 9,000 years ago, they were. Likewise, there's oral traditions of a meteorite impact in South Australia that appear accurate, again 8,000 years old. It's nearly impossible to wipe out coyotes from an area. If you kill them, the females will begin to have bigger litters to balance it out. In some instances, even killing 70% of an area coyote population wasn't enough to stop them repopulating. I believe feral pigs are in a similar boat. You have to eradicate over 90% of a sounder to get close to a negative population control. That's why in my state, you can actually get in trouble with the game wardens if you see a feral hog and have the means to safely dispatch it but don't. I want to say that a farmer in the county I live in lost something like 40% of his corn crop last year to a particularly large and aggressive sounder. Don't quote me on that. I know he had to hire out the extermination job because there were too many of them. For clarification, sounder equals collective term for feral pigs. The average cloud weighs 550 tons. If you see a picture of a starving kid with a disproportionately large belly, it doesn't mean the kid's been recently fed or overfed or anything like that. Most of the time it's abdominal edema caused by a low protein intake. Yup, I know this because of World War II. When Holocaust concentration camps were liberated, Allied soldiers fed them with massive amounts of food. Medics came to them and told them to stop feeding them that much food. It was heartbreaking for the German-speaking soldiers. They had to tell them that they had to stop eating. It was a heartbreaking occasion and thing to do. The people in the concentration were used to eating very small amounts of food, and when they started eating massive amounts of food, they started dying. Same thing was occurring couple years later all across Eastern and Central Europe when the POWs returned from the Soviet captivity. Figs aren't vegan. Unless you ignore the fact that you are eating dead wasps, figs are never going to be the same again. At least the figs absorb the wasps. Worse is biting into a gross pistachio and knowing it was probably a worm. There are more bones in gummy worms than in actual worms. I don't understand what bones are in gummy worms. Gelatin, my guy. There are more iterations in a game of chess than there are atoms in the observable universe. Card deck shuffled too. Nice, I didn't know that one. Saudi Arabia imports their camels from Australia. For 40 years, hundreds of children were sent by their parents to a boarding school in Maine, USA that cost $50,000 a year. It was actually an abusive cult that psychologically tortured them, including an actual fight club where staff would demand that one child be beaten by multiple other children. This was called the Ring and was called a therapeutic tool by the drug addicts who ran the place. This school https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/%c3%89 lan_school was only closed down in 2011. Edit: if you want to see a first-hand account, check this out. https://shalan.school/chapter15/ but be warned, this rabbit hole is deep, but totally worth it. All credit to /u/Mr_Joe_nobody who is sharing his entire soul on this one. Fun fact, this is the same school that Michael Skakel, a Kennedy cousin, was sent to where he reportedly confessed to the murder of Martha Moxley. He was sent to the ring and beat up until he confessed, so I'm not sure how much of a confession it really was. It was also the school that destroyed the life of Tiffany Sedaris and likely caused her to later commit suicide. The place was like a hell on earth. The oldest woman to give birth was 72 years old, the youngest was a 5-year-old girl from Peru, and the highest number of kids born at once was 8. 5-year birth. Da fuck? Yes, they needed to do a cesarean section because her vagina had not developed enough to give birth. Cheetahs can't roar. They meow like cats, it's adorable. They also chirp, it's so cute. There is a fence in Australia that is longer than the distance from NYC to London. And that's not like a trick statement. It's a long fence. That reminds me of the rabbit-proof fence. Very good movie about an Aboriginal girl taken away from her family and forced into an abusive boarding school. She escapes and walks through the harsh desert to get back to her village. The film follows the Aboriginal girls as they walk for 9 weeks along 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers, of the Australian rabbit-proof fence to return to their community at Jigalong, while being pursued by white law enforcement authorities and an Aboriginal tracker. 2. The film illustrates the official child removal policy that existed in Australia between approximately 1905 and 1967. Its victims now are called the Stolen Generations. The distance these girls traveled alone is insane. But also factor in the terrain they were traveling through, some of the harshest desert environments in the world, all while avoiding capture from Aboriginal trackers.